So today we're staying with a theme, and the last Wealth Wednesday 2 weeks ago that I recorded was around estate planning as well, but talking more specifically around the Secure Act and the different varying rules that were created and adjusted because of that Secure Act. Today we're going to go and talk a little bit more from a softer angle, talking about things that you want to think about, 5 questions that you need to answer before passing on an inheritance. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go ahead and get into it. Let me know as well if I'm coming through clear, if everything is technically sound on that front. I believe it is. And feel free as well at any point during this presentation, if you guys have any questions, comments, things you want to add in, feel free to do that in the comments. I'll try to keep track of that and make sure I answer any of those questions. So today we're talking about the 5 questions you need to answer before passing on an inheritance and how some unexpected problems can come from some of your answers to those questions. So let's get into it. And it's one thing when we talk about inheritances and inheritances that you might leave. I will say generally people that are watching our content on YouTube or people that are part of this group tend to be a little bit more middle class, upper middle class, having some significant savings. And when we run someone's plan, we're running that plan under 1,000 trials. Many of you understand this philosophy for how we plan. And so we take your situation. Let's say you have $1.5 million, and you have a certain spending goal. Well, we don't know what future returns are going to look like. Okay, we don't know what kind of how returns in general are just going to adjust year to year. And so we run that plan under 1,000 simulations to try to determine how safe and how much of a margin of safety you have given your plan. And so as we run those 1,000 scenarios, there's going to be a wide distribution of outcomes. Okay, in certain scenarios, like the top scenarios like this, we might see a roaring 80s type of situation or a roaring 90s where we really don't see a market crash for a decade or even longer than that. Versus you can see from just a wide distribution of outcomes here. So this person's situation, they have a 78% probability of success. In the worst scenario, it looks like they run out of money in 2040. In the top scenario, it looks like they're leaving 10, 15, 20 million potentially on to their heirs. And so the likelihood of leaving an inheritance is going to be high for any well-built retirement plan. And why is that? Well, we always need to know that we need to have a margin of safety at the end of that plan, because we don't know when that plan is going to end, right? If we knew exactly how long you were going to live, we could bounce that last check essentially, but we don't know that. So there always needs to be some kind of margin of safety. So the majority of people that are part of this group, it's a very high likelihood you will leave some kind of inheritance on if your plan, again, is built properly. And again, as we break down someone's situation, again, this person might have started with $1.5 million. We see their income graph where their income is going to come from throughout their retirement. We see some RMDs here that we're going to want to deal with from a tax planning angle. But notice what happens at the end of their plan. We estimate they'll have in an average trial $1.3 million in current dollars that they'll pass on. Well, in future dollars, that may be something like $2.5 or $3.5 million. Okay, and so again, there are certain people that don't want to leave an inheritance, and we can adjust that plan going forward into the future if things are going very well. Somewhere in this region right here, we can raise their income to try to eliminate inheritance. But for the most part, a lot of retirees today, especially that are part of this group, will leave an inheritance. So we're going to be talking about 5 questions that you want to be able to answer as you think about your inheritance plan. And again, demographics wise, the baby boomer generation is the wealthiest generation from any generation before them. And so again, there's a lot of talk around as well, just demographic changes, baby boomers passing away down the road, transferring that wealth to the next generation, and all of the details that will entail. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about the Secure Act of 2020, this huge estate law change and how it will affect how you pass money on to the next generation. Okay. Today, we're going to be talking about some softer aspects to that. For instance, one of the questions is, how will you split up your inheritance? And there are different layers and levels as we start digging deeper into essentially different paths that can come from how you're going to even split up your inheritance. So word of warning before we start asking these questions and getting into some of the details around these questions. Tony and my opinions on this matter do not matter for your situation. Okay. How you leave an inheritance, how you split it up, what you want done with that inheritance is a very personal decision. There are no right or wrong answers. Okay. We're going to go through a bunch of different angles in this presentation today. I'm not going to give my opinion on any angle. I'm going to try to play a devil's advocate here and talk about why you might choose this specific way to split up your assets, why you might choose a different way, and benefits and drawbacks of every different angle. I just want to be clear that my opinion, Tony's opinion on this matter does not matter. This is a personal decision. There are no right or wrong answers here. It's your money at the end of the day. You shouldn't feel guilty at all about how you want to pass money on or not pass money on to the next generation or causes that you care about. This is your money. It's your money while you're alive and planning for retirement. You can spend it how you want while you're alive. You can also determine how it gets spent after you pass away as well. So don't feel bad or guilty about any potential ways that you want to split up your money. Okay. Let's get into these 5 answers though. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation. So first question seems like a very simple question. Okay. How do you want your assets split? Okay. Let's say you leave $1 million or $2 million to your heirs. However many heirs you lay out, how do you want those assets split? Now I will say the most common answer is equal split, meaning that generally we find that retirees generally want to pass money on to the immediate next generation. So meaning your children, and most common answer we get are equal splits. Okay. So let's go through an example. Let's say this person, hypothetical person, has 3 children, a daughter and 2 sons. Here's a breakdown, a very rough breakdown of their assets. They have $1.1 million in traditional IRAs, $200,000 in Roth IRAs, $100,000 in brokerage accounts, and $350,000 of a personal residence that's the mortgage is paid off. So they own it free and clear. So their total assets is around $1.75 million. Okay, now if they want these assets split up equally, what will that look like? Well, intuitively, here's how most people will split it up equally. They'll give a third of each account to each child. So $366,000 from a traditional IRA, and I'm rounding here, obviously, goes to each child. $66,000 from a Roth, $33,000 from brokerage, and a third of that personal residence, $116,000, goes to each child. On paper, it looks like $583,000 will pass to each child. Okay, but we know that most likely each of these children will have they'll be in a different tax situation. Okay, so how much does each of those children actually receive? Let's say hypothetically the daughter is in the highest tax brackets. Her and her husband are making the most amount of money out of the 3 kids. And so they're in the 24% bracket. They live in Wisconsin. So we add on another 6% state tax. And when I say effective tax rate, I don't mean on their entire situation. I mean on as they're forced to take withdrawals from traditional IRAs that they inherit because of the Secure Act rule, what is that effective tax rate of that withdrawal going to be? So for this first daughter, it's 30%. Middle son is going to be 28%. They're in the 22% bracket, add on another 6% state tax. And then the youngest son, he's in the 12% bracket, again, tacking on an extra 6% for Wisconsin state tax. And we see, because they're receiving a traditional IRA, each of these children, they're going to have to pay taxes from the withdrawals from that traditional IRA. So we see in net of taxes, in the most extreme case, the daughter receives $471,000 of value. The youngest son receives $515,000. So an almost $45,000 difference. But yet it looks like it's split equally. But we can see that this is only equal on paper, but that's it. So the first question that you need to answer is, how do you actually want your money split? Do you want it split equally on paper, or do you want it split equally net of taxes? Okay, if you're going to split equally net on paper, Okay, it's very likely that you are going to be paying more in taxes, or at least your heirs are going to be paying more in taxes than they need to. If you equal out net of taxes, you're going to be much more tax efficient. So many people in this group are going to be very tax focused while you're alive. But that's, again, we need to make sure you're tax focused, I guess tax planning does not stop when you pass away. Okay, tax planning has to take place both for your life as well as you pass money on to the next generation. So the first decision that you need to make, even if you're splitting equally, how do you want it split equally, on paper or net of taxes? Okay, because if we're going to equalize this out net of taxes, okay, this daughter has the highest marginal or the highest effective tax rate on any withdrawals that she will take. Okay, so ideally, we want to split each of these accounts in a different way, where one child might be getting almost all of a Roth account, while the other child might be getting almost all of it in an IRA account. And so given this breakup, how would we ideally split to equal out net of taxes? Well, this first daughter would probably be getting the smallest traditional IRA inheritance. Why? Because she's going to be forced to take money from that IRA. She's going to be forced to pay taxes on any withdrawals from that IRA. Well, her effective tax rate is almost double of the youngest son's. Okay. And so instead, we'd probably want to transfer brokerage, Roth, and real estate assets. The Roth will be tax-free no matter who receives it. Brokerage and real estate, the heirs will get a step up in basis, at least how the rules are currently set up. So for instance, let's say in that brokerage account, when the parents pass away, they have $200, they have $100,000, I think, in the brokerage account. Yeah, $100,000 in the brokerage account. Let's say that their cost basis was $50,000, which means they had a $50,000 gain. Well, when they pass that on, the heirs are going to get a step up in basis. So if they immediately take that money and use it or withdraw that money from that brokerage account, they're not going to owe any taxes. So we ideally want those accounts passed on to the people with the highest effective tax rate. Instead, we want the IRA inheritance, the traditional IRA, passed to the son or the child with the lowest effective tax rates. What will this do? Well, this will mean that IRA withdrawals will come out at the lowest possible effective tax rates. So again, this means the majority of your assets will pass on rather than Uncle Sam getting a larger portion. Okay, but on paper, what will this look like? Well, typically the people that are receiving brokerage and Roth assets will receive a larger or a smaller amount on paper. Why? Because the larger or the IRA, the traditional IRA balance should pass to the person that has the lowest effective tax rate, and therefore will have to pay taxes out of that. So it might turn out where the youngest son gets an extra $100,000 or $150,000 on paper, but remember, they have to pay taxes. Okay, so it all equalizes out down the road. Okay, and so again, planning for the next generation is part of tax planning. Okay, if you're taking all of these steps during your life to tax plan, okay, but then you don't think about what taxes look like passing on to the next generation, it doesn't seem consistent, right? Our goal is to keep the most amount of the wealth that you have earned with you or your family benefiting from it. And so this should continue as we go forward into the next generation. Ron says, yes, interesting concept, but it's going to take the knowledge of the tax brackets of the heirs. Yes, we're going to talk about that in a sec. A couple will likely not die at the same time. How does this affect those answers? Well, typically, the way most situations are set up, the spouse is the primary beneficiary, so they will receive all of your IRA, your Roth accounts when you pass away, if that spouse survives you. And then when that spouse passes away, they will set up this, essentially your contingent beneficiaries, or as the spouse passes away, they will set up this kind of strategy. So we know with this 10-year rule, we now need to plan in a way where traditional IRAs or Roth accounts need to be emptied within this 10 years. So if you pass on, again, $1 million to a specific heir, that heir will need to basically take distributions and empty out that $1 million account through these 10 years. If they do it equally, it will mean $100,000 or more that they will need to empty out each and every year. And so there's also no reason that you have to split things equally. Okay. So again, I will say that's the most common answer, but also know that, again, it's your money at the end of the day. I'm not saying this is right or wrong. It's your decision. So it doesn't have to be equal. Okay. You can go towards what would be called more of an equal outcome. So obviously this daughter who's making more money is in a wealthier position than the two sons. The son is in the middle position. The youngest son is obviously making a little bit less, is in a lower middle class position. So we have upper middle, and lower middle class. And so you could certainly distribute it in a way where you're trying to equalize out everybody's wealth. So you could pass it on where the youngest son receives the majority of the money, because you can make a case the daughter and the middle son don't have as much of a need. Okay, that is completely fine for you to set up. It doesn't have to be equal. Alternatively, you could do the opposite. Okay, so why? And again, some people might ask, why would you do the opposite? Why would you give the majority of the money to the daughter who's making the most? Well, a reason you might do that is you have saved. Likely many of you have lived well within your means. You've thought about saving for the future. You've invested prudently. You've been very prudent with your wealth. Well, in certain situations, and we all know families that are like this, there's sometimes one son or one child who isn't as savvy with money, isn't as prudent with money. If money hits their account, they're spending it right away. Okay, they view money in a different sense. And so if you've saved all of this money over time and you've accumulated and been prudent with wealth, maybe you want to pass that on to another person who is also prudent with wealth. Okay, so that might look like you're actually passing the majority on to the daughter who is handling their wealth well, and the least amount onto the son who won't handle it, who will spend it immediately, or will take it all out at once and pay significantly more in taxes. So again, it doesn't have to be equal. You can divvy it up however you decide. Okay, a couple items that I would urge you to consider. Write down essentially very broadly what your goal is with your inheritance. Okay, is your goal to ideally split it up equally? Because again, we know that splitting it up equally in terms of on paper versus net of taxes is going to be two totally different solutions. Okay, spend some time on this process. Talk with your spouse. What do you actually want done with your inheritance? What is the goal of your inheritance? Okay, we'll talk about a few more questions that build on this process, but I highly recommend writing a letter to include with your estate, laying out your thought process. Because again, if you set things out where it's equal net of taxes, your heirs might be surprised when one heir gets $100,000 more on paper. But again, that's because they have to pay more in taxes. So you're equalizing it out where one person's getting a larger inheritance on paper, while the other inheritances are net of taxes or already after taxes. So they're receiving a smaller amount, but it's after tax money. It can be surprising when people see how things are divvied up. So I recommend including a letter in your estate, just explaining your thought process. Okay, so nobody is surprised, angry, and whatnot. Because of, if we are planning for net of taxes, this is something that where your estate should be reviewed and updated annually. If you're performing Roth conversions, okay, that's going to change the amount you have in Roth assets. Well, if you originally have one child set up as the 100% beneficiary for your Roth assets because they're in a higher tax bracket, okay, well, you're going to be adding more because of Roth conversions to that account. So you might want to update those percentages annually based on this adjustment, based on market performance, based on how much you take from each account in a given year. And then, yes, you will have to factor in your heirs' tax rates. But again, the goal here for doing so is because your tax focus while you're alive. Why would that stop just because you've passed away? It's still money that you've worked that hard to accumulate. If you want your heirs to get the most benefit from that, and once again, keep the most out of Uncle Sam's pocket, again, factoring in your heirs' tax rates is extremely important. Again, you might be able to do this easier than you might think. Again, if you have a decent idea of how much your heirs make, we can kind of back propagate that and figure that out. Otherwise, I highly recommend having discussions. And again, if My parents came to me with this type of discussion. I wouldn't have any issues with it because, again, we're trying to figure out and keep the most out of within the most wealth within the family and out of Uncle Sam's hands. So that's something where everyone wins. So even some rough guidelines here can go a long way. Okay. If everybody is in the same tax brackets, obviously splitting it out equally on paper is probably pretty easy. It's very difficult to do both. It's very difficult if people have varying tax rates to have it equalize out on paper and equalize out net of taxes. And again, planning net of taxes typically means the majority or the most money is passing on after tax. Okay. So I highly recommend people start thinking about splitting it up net of taxes equally, if that's what you so choose. And we'll use this example of a daughter and two sons throughout a lot of our examples here. But question number 2, do you plan to give to charity? Again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. This is completely up to you. But if you plan to give out to charity, it will completely change your inheritance plan if you're running it as efficiently as possible. So let's say this family wants to give to charity and essentially wants to give a fourth of the wealth that they're going to accumulate to a cause they care about for whatever reason. Okay. Well, let's just talk kind of philosophically why we give to charity. Okay. The number one reason to give to charity is to basically accomplish one of these 3 goals. Help the less fortunate. Maybe you've gotten some lucky breaks and you know people or demographics that haven't gotten as lucky of breaks. Well, giving money to the less fortunate could be a fantastic thing, making an impact or a difference. Okay. Maybe it's not a less fortunate thing. Maybe it's rather than giving fish, maybe it's teaching people how to fish. Okay. So that might be giving to a cause that you care about significantly. And this can run the gamut. Obviously, it can be anything from climate change to and giving to the NRA. Okay, anything in between. It's specific and personalized to you. Okay, or you can pay it forward. Maybe you received a benefit from a charity in the past for whatever reason, cancer research, anything like that, and you just want to pay it forward. Okay, but there are some ancillary reasons that we give, and we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about. Okay, first off, it feels good. Okay, there is a physical, a mental benefit to giving. Okay, it feels great. And then again, taxes and financial benefits. Well, here's the thing. I recommend everyone here, if giving to charity is part of your inheritance plan, do not wait until you pass away to give to charity. Okay, give to charity as part of your inheritance plan while you're still alive. Why? Because the ancillary benefits that we talk about, the it feeling good and the tax and financial benefits are mostly eliminated if you're waiting till death to give to charity. Okay, here's why. Let's talk about an inheritance focused tax plan. So this was for a client who was in a very wealthy position relative to the income that they were going to take. They were going to pass on a large inheritance any way that you sliced it. Okay. And so they want to do tax plan in an inheritance focused way. Okay. But charity was part of their inheritance plan. Okay. And so we see here that they're going to be in some very low tax brackets here early in retirement. And then later in retirement, solely because of RMDs, we see them being pushed into the 33% bracket. So these are going to be some significant RMDs that are going to push them into multiple higher tax brackets. So right off the bat, we know that Roth conversions can help lower their tax burden while they're still alive. Okay, this might be something where we're maxing out even the 24% bracket here. Okay, early in retirement before 2025, and then maybe even additional Roth conversions later on. Okay, and so this is a situation where if we're not thinking about inheritance tax planning, some things are going to change. Okay. Again, we know that they're wanting to give to charity. So remember that as we talk through this process. So it might turn out where we're converting something like $300,000, if not more, in these first couple of years. Okay, in order to avoid the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, in order to lower RMDs later on. Well, that might cause them to owe, in this example, $94,000 in that first year of conversions. And basically what this shows tax increases are from conversions, tax decreases are from what you save in taxes on RMDs. And we notice later on, there are some significant tax savings. So we know that it balances out. The thing is, how aggressive should they be with Roth conversions? Okay, inheritance focused tax planning, okay, and wanting to pass money on to the next generation, I would say it will allow them to convert less because they can give to charity while they're still alive in a fantastic way. If they weren't inheritance focused, we might be trying to convert almost all of their IRA balances in order to avoid Social Security tax torpedoes later on in here, and really just try to avoid these RMDs altogether. But because they're inheritance tax focused, let's say with the conversions, they're still going to have a relatively significant RMD. Okay, their RMD, let's say we estimate it'll be $65,000. We see the taxes on the RMD, the taxes on Social Security that they'll owe because of that RMD. We see they lose essentially 31% of this RMD to taxes. Okay, and this isn't even including state taxes. Okay, so if we were planning solely for their life and tax planning, we try to eliminate these RMDs altogether. But because they want to give to charity, there's an awesome loophole, let's say, that allows them to give to charity while they're still alive, receive a huge financial benefit, and also receive the feeling good benefit because they're seeing they're seeing their charity gift essentially deployed into action, if you will. So there's something called a qualified charitable distribution that they could use. Okay, so if they want to eliminate this full RMD, rather than waiting until the end of their life and splitting up their inheritance a fourth, they can take their charity inheritance and give it through their life. Okay, so they could give this entire RMD to the charity, okay, in a given year. A QCD is nice because it's a above the line deduction, meaning that you can take the QCD, get a full deduction for that, and still get the standard deduction on top of that. Okay, so basically they could either, they have two options. Okay, they could take this RMD in a given year, pay the taxes, and just accumulate it as part of their wealth and split everything up a fourth after they pass away. Or while they're still alive, they can give this QCD. At the end of their life, just go back to splitting a third between their heirs because they had given to charity throughout their life. And basically what that will do is it will eliminate this full $65,000 RMD. That charity will get the full $65,000. They won't pay to the tax man. They won't retain, obviously, any of this RMD, but they're accomplishing their goal by giving to charity. Okay, we're just talking about QCDs here. There's a lot of other ways that you can give to charity as well. If in your brokerage account, you have a position where you have a low cost basis relative to the fair market value, okay, that can be another great way to give to charity while you're still alive. Okay, you get a deduction based on the full fair market value of that asset, and you also eliminate the cost basis that you would eventually owe down the road when you sold off that position. So there's a lot of different ways we can give to charity. I will say just overall, giving to charity while you're still alive is a significantly better option than passing money on to charity when you pass away. Okay, you'll get a lot more benefit from doing so. Number three, do you want to have control over your distribution? So let's go through a potential scenario. And again, a lot of people will turn their nose at this idea, controlling distributions after you've passed away. Some people think you shouldn't be able to, if you're going to give money, just give the money, let them spend it however you want. Again, if this is something that you want to do, I think this is a completely reasonable estate planning goal. So let's talk through it. Let's go through a potential scenario. So you've acquired a significant amount of wealth through living within your means and prudently saving. So you've done a fantastic job. You've been extremely tax focused in retirement, and now you're in your 80s. You've accumulated a sizable amount of wealth, and this wealth is large enough to change your heirs' lives if given outright. Okay, your plan is to split your wealth between two children. One child basically received your savings gene. Okay, they're financially prudent. They're very financially prudent, just like you are. While the other child seems to always have brand new things, can't seem to accumulate wealth despite earning a reasonable amount of income, basically because of their spending habits. So what might happen? Okay, well, as you pass that money on, really the amount doesn't matter as much, but let's say it's a significant amount. Let's say each of these children have the potential to inherit multiple millions of dollars. Okay, well, keep in mind the Secure Act. If these children are inheriting, let's say each child's inheriting $1 million IRA. Okay, well, what would the financially prudent child do? Again, assuming they're getting good advice, they're probably going to spread out that those withdrawals that they're forced to take within these 10 years, and it's technically 11 years, but for simplicity, let's just talk through 10 years. They're going to split up those 10 years of withdrawals equally to try to spread out their tax liability in most cases. Okay. Well, what will the non-financially prudent son do? Okay. They like to spend. Okay. The money can't seem to accumulate in their bank account. Well, they're probably going to take it all out in 1 year. Okay. Well, what will that do? Well, taking $1 million out of an IRA, that's going to force them into the top tax bracket. Okay. Tax that majority of their wealth will be taxed at 37%. They're probably going to retain somewhere around, I don't know, $700,000, paying $300,000 to in taxes, depending on what state they live in. Okay. And all of a sudden you pass on a ton of money, but because this son who's not as financially prudent spends a lot of money, will probably take it all out. They're eliminating a ton of the wealth that you've accumulated just like that, because they didn't take it out in the best way. So what's an alternative? Well, you can control distributions to just one son or daughter, to both, to all heirs that you distribute to. And how can you do that? You can do that with something called a trust. Okay, so a trust is basically a blank slate. It's highly customizable and allows you to control distributions in a lot of different ways. Okay, so rather than outright giving each of these children the ability to withdraw out a significant amount of money owing a significant amount of taxes, you can control the distributions from these accounts. Okay, trusts are highly customizable. Okay, basically, if you can think up some kind of stipulation that you want to put in a trust, it's very likely you're able to put that in a trust. So you can control all distributions or just some distributions. So you can control, given this scenario, that both sons in this scenario have to withdraw that money out in the most prudent way and split up in equal periodic payments, so that you kind of control the taxes and are as tax efficient as possible. Okay, you can set it up where those sons just get a flat amount each and every year. Okay, if you pass on $2 million, you can set it up where they get 2 to 4% of whatever the trust value is in a given year, and it gets passed as income. Okay, you can control how it's invested and grown, so that if you've grown your wealth through a sound investment strategy, you can continue with that sound investment strategy to continue to grow wealth. Again, why would you do that? Well, ultimately, you're doing it for the benefit of your heirs. Okay, if they're going to, again, not be financially non-prudent, okay, you can essentially control and make sure they stay financially prudent. So rather than it just benefiting them for the first 5 years after they spend all that money, it's benefiting them for their entire life. And again, you've worked so hard to accumulate all this money. It's still your money. Okay, you can choose how it passes on to the next generation. You can stretch inheritances to multiple generations. We'll talk about that actually in question 4. What are some drawbacks to controlling distributions, designing a trust? Well, expense and complexity. Okay, trusts aren't free. You'll have to work with an estate planning lawyer in order to set up a trust. And also the complexity of, if you're going to lay out and control distributions, you have to lay out every specific guideline for doing so. So you don't even have to have it specified on a periodic payment schedule. You can also set up a trustee, someone who basically controls the money that flows from that trust. And you can lay out qualified expenses. So maybe you don't want frivolous expenses coming from that trust, but you might want to help somebody out with college, or with buying their home, a first home or a second home or an additional home, or a new vehicle or anything like that. However, that comes with complexity, because you need to lay out essentially every what if for money that comes from that trust or how that trust is invested. And then also know there's some Secure Act coordination that can be important. Okay, so basically, if you're distributing from an IRA and you're not passing on that distribution to the heir, and the trust holds it basically above $13,000 in 2021, trust income rates are at the highest possible tax rate, 37%. So if you're not coordinating with the Secure Act properly, you can pay some very high taxes within a trust. But again, all of these can be sidestepped and planned around if you know how to coordinate with the Secure Act. Okay, So question number 4 that kind of bolts onto this last question, do you want to stretch an inheritance for generations? Again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. This is your inheritance plan as a blank slate that you can build to follow any wishes that you want. Okay, if you've accumulated a large amount of money and you want to make a difference in multiple generations to come, you can completely do that if you set it up properly. Warren Buffett, I think, has a great idea on inheritances. Obviously, he's very financially prudent. To some, the best investor ever to live. He says the imperfect inheritance is enough money so that your children will feel like they can do anything, but not so much that they could do nothing. Okay, and so some families have, again, that have accumulated a large amount of money, have worries about passing a sum of money on outright and what drawbacks can come from that. Okay, the perfect inheritance, however, as Warren Buffett says, is enough money where it benefits their lives. It gives them more options. Let's say that you have an heir that was planning on opening a business when they were younger. This was their dream. But for whatever reason, they started a family a little bit earlier and had to put that dream on the sidelines. And so they're now in a job that they don't love. They still would love to start a business, but can't do so because of the financial obligations, because of the risk of starting a business. Well, passing on a perfect inheritance can put them in a position where they can have the confidence, the financial capability to go back to that dream and start that business they always dreamed to. So you can essentially improve their life. The risk, if you pass on a significant amount of money outright, is they spend it all at once. Okay, they increase their spending habits because of that, because they had a ton of cash that they had never experienced before, they'd never handled before, and now they blow it within 5 years or something like that. And so controlling inheritance, again, based on that last question that we asked, can be an idea or can fit into your plan depending on the family. Okay, so again, how would this work? Well, parents put that money in a trust. That trust controls distributions in a way where there's always enough money that goes to the next generation. So rather than passing on $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, and again, if you pass money on later in your life, it's very likely that your children are set up where they've already have their retirement set up for their life. So giving $1 million, $2 million, $3 million onto them might not offer as much benefit as passing money on to your grandchildren that might be right on the cusp of college or just starting out their careers. And so again, there's a lot of variability that can be created with this trust. The big idea meaning that you're passing on controlled distributions in order for that money to last multiple lifetimes. And I don't think this is a ridiculous idea. Some people might think, oh, it's crazy to have a multi-generational goal. That's left for billionaires. Okay, well, you've worked hard to accumulate the amount of money that you've accumulated. Again, somebody's starting out with $1 to $5 million at the beginning of retirement based on their income goal. And if they manage their situation properly, it's not crazy for them to have $10, $20 million when they pass away. Okay, well, that's a huge sum of money that can make a difference over multi-generations. And so is it crazy to have a multi-generational goal? I don't think so. But I think it's completely possible to set that up if you so wish. Okay, this last one is going to be a little bit shorter of an idea. Okay, how do you want your inheritances to be split by branch? What do I mean by branch? Well, there's 2 Latin terms here, per Stirpes and per capita, that every beneficiary form you have, you will be able to choose one or the other. Okay, and they vary in somewhat significant ways. Okay, so let's explain this. Hopefully this will come alive, what I mean by branch. Okay, so let's say we have parents here, they have 3 children, okay, and 3 grandchildren. Okay, and let's say child number 3 has passed away. So per Stirpes basically means that the inheritance that a branch of the family receives will pass to their heirs equally. Okay, so here we see 3 children, 1 has passed away. Each of these children's branches are set to get 1/3 of this inheritance. So child number 1, because they're still alive, will receive the 1/3. Grandchild number 1, will not receive anything because child number 1 is still alive. Their parents are still alive. Child number 2 doesn't have any heirs. They'll receive their 1/3. Child number 3 would have received their 1/3, but they have already passed away. The parents outlived this child. So per Stirpes means that their benefit, their 1/3 benefit, passes equally to their heirs. So grandchild number 2 and grandchild number 3 each receive 1/6. They receive half of that 1/3 allocation that they would receive. What happens if child number 1 passed away as well? Well, grandchild number 1 would receive that 1/3 interest. So now grandchild number 1 would receive 1/3 interest. Child number 2, who's still alive, would receive 1/3 interest. Grandchild number 2 and 3, it would be split. They would each receive 1/6. Okay, so this is per Stirpes. This is the most common way to split it up. Because again, most people think if I have a child that dies, I want their heirs to then benefit from that inheritance. You can also decide per capita. And we're going to show an example per capita by generation. Per capita can vary a little bit. Per capita by generation is the most common of the per capita strategies. In this scenario, the inheritances are split up by essentially generation, if you will. Okay, so let's use that same last example. Child 1 has passed away. Child number 3 has also passed away. Child number 2 is the only direct child that is still alive. So they'll receive their 1/3 interest. But then going to the next generation, everything is equalized out. Okay, so child number 2 is receiving their 1/3 interest. The grandchildren are then going to receive 2/3 interest, but it's going to be split equally by generation. Okay, and again, why might you do this? Well, you might do this so you make sure that every grandchild receives the same amount after that first generation has passed away. So again, you can go with either of these type of beneficiary designation strategies. There's no right or wrong answer. It really depends on how you want that money split up to the next set of generations, given somebody in that first branch had passed away. Okay. And so in summary, okay, we talked about 5 questions that I think are extremely important to answer as you're building an inheritance plan. Number 1, how do you want your money split between heirs? There's no right or wrong answers. The most common answer is equal. But even there's another decision. Do you want it equal on paper or do you want it equal net of taxes? Okay, do you plan to give to charity as part of your inheritance plan? That's a fantastic thing to do. Highly recommend you still give to your heirs the equal split that you would have previously done, and instead build in a ongoing charitable strategy. So give your charitable inheritance while you're still alive. You get additional tax and financial benefits, and you also get the benefit of seeing your charitable contribution make a difference. Okay, do you want to control distributions from your inheritance or even stretch those inheritances to multiple generations? You can do so with a trust. Trusts can become complicated, but are kind of an open, a clean slate as far as how you break things down and your wishes with that trust. Okay, and then finally, if an heir passes away, how do you want to treat their branch of inheritance? Per Stirpes, per capita, either is completely fine, but there is a significant difference between the two. Okay, hopefully this was informational. Let me know if you're watching this afterwards. If you have any questions, always remember you don't need more money. You need a better plan. As we can see, the more questions that we ask, the deeper we get into these layers, complications arise with inheritance planning. And that's all right. Again, it's the important part is not that complications arise. It's that we're fitting your inheritance plan in accordance to your goals. And by doing so, it typically means that we'll end up saving on taxes, keeping more money, more wealth in your family distributed to your heirs rather than paying that out to Uncle Sam. So again, let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully this was informational, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.